My guest, Richard Lawrence, is going to fill us in on some CIA and Pentagon UFO disclosure. See you in about 5 minutes. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust. Turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to California Haunts Radio. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour. I know for my usual crowd, 10 o'clock in the morning Pacific is a little early, but we have a special guest tonight. And that's why I'm doing the show this early. I want to welcome everybody here. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team based out of Sacramento, California. We're 45 strong up and down the state of California. That means that if you have any kind of paranormal need or you think you might have a paranormal need, we can get to you because we have people in almost every county in the state. Anywho, I want to welcome our guest. You know, there's been a lot said about extraterrestrials and UFOs and things like that, especially lately, especially with what, with what was going on with the U.S. Congress a while back. My guest tonight, Richard Lawrence, has looked into all that stuff, and it's going to be interesting to talk to him. He's got an interesting background. I'll let him describe what his background and connection is with all this because it's very interesting indeed. And I believe, honestly, I believe that at some point there is going to be disclosure. Now, how much disclosure we're actually going to get, who knows? But there is at some point going to be some type of disclosure with this stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and bring Richard on and let him tell you his story because it's easier if he does that instead of me doing it. All right, here we go. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Hi, Charlotte. Good morning to you.
It's evening for you, right?
It is 6:00 p.m., but it happens to be, I think, the hottest day on record here. So we could almost be in California.
That's right. I heard you
which
guys.
I love.
I heard you guys were having a heat wave over there.
Absolutely. I was told we were the hottest country in the world yesterday, which for Britain is quite extraordinary. Have you been here, Charlotte?
I have.
All right. Well, then you probably know.
I have family in Croydon.
In where? Sorry.
I have family in Croydon, England.
Oh, Croydon. Okay, that's not far from us. Well,
Yes.
When you visit next time, you must come up here to the European headquarters of the Aetherius Society in London. We'll make you very welcome.
Absolutely. So tell me about you, sir.
Well, it's great to be talking to you in California because I've spent a lot of time in California because the gentleman you can see, the photo just behind me, I'm in my office right now, he was based in Hollywood, California, Dr. George King, and he founded the Aetherius Society. And I've been secretary of that society for over 40 years, actually. But, and you can say I was 5 when I started, Charlotte. But actually, the society started in 1955 and was registered in California as a non-profit corporation in 1960. And I do believe that we're the oldest UFO contact organization in the world. Certainly that we've been consistently active throughout that period right up to today. So I mean, our prime interest, I have to say straight off the bat, is spiritual, and that used to be absolutely sort of really looked down on. I don't know with your organization whether you're open to the spiritual side of things. I imagine you must be.
Absolutely.
Great, but there was a time in the UFO movement where, and people like MUFON at one time, for example, were really looked down at the spiritual side. They were nuts and bolts. They were, metal and objects and facts and files, and they weren't, they didn't like. But they changed. Last time I was over there, actually, when my book came out, UFOs and the Extraterrestrial Message. Not the last time I was there, but when I launched that, I'd spoke at some MUFON events, and they were very open to it. So that's a great progress, I think, because I don't think it can really be understood fully without a spiritual approach to the subject. But just to cut, I mean, I don't want to bore all your listeners with my whole history, but one of the things I've been involved in for over 40 years is campaigning for the disclosure on UFOs, and that's starting to happen. I agree with you. It's it's not there yet, and you don't know how much to trust, but there has been what we used to call in the society I'm in, the Aetherius Society, a And by the way, we have a headquarters in California, in Hollywood, as well as here in London. Those are our two.
Nice.
So the people, your people, or anyone watching, be really welcome to visit us in Hollywood. Our website's Aetherius, AETHERIUS.org. But I think one great thing that's happened in the last sort of 2 or 3 years is the stigma has gone from UFOs, other than among idiots. I don't want to really look down on disbelievers or try and, because they treated us badly for a long time, that the
Right.
disbelievers, but we're not going to sort of return like for like. They're entitled to disbelieve if they really want to, but it's no longer, you've got people in the forces, the Navy, the Army, proper, very good, genuine witnesses who can now, and especially the Air Force, who can come out and talk about it without their colleagues ridiculing them, or having to keep quiet, or be lied about, because the government's lied for so long.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I just think like you say, even with ghost hunting, when I first started doing this 25 years ago, there was a stigma with it,
Yeah.
that everybody was flaky that was doing it. But now that you see these ghost shows, and as the years have gone, I think people are more open minded to this stuff.
Yeah, I think so. And the other thing is, of course, one doesn't want to go the other way. I mean, I'm not saying, I actually don't expect anybody to believe me when I say that Dr. George King was
Mm-hmm.
contacted and was in contact for over 43 years. That's an incredible thing to say,
Mm-hmm.
and I would expect people to have questions about that. And I think what I can see of your organization is you investigate carefully, and of
Yeah.
course there are false claims out there. Not
Mm-hmm.
all the false claims are deliberate, by the way. I think a lot of people believe these things, or believe things that there is an explanation, or they aren't quite true. But having said that, to dismiss it out of hand is ludicrous.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There is so much evidence, and in the case of Dr. King, I would just say to people, go by what he published, what he said, the contacts that he had. They're on the record. You can find them. They're on the internet. You can get books, and you can hear actually some of the communications, because he was a medium. Now, I've done mediumship, not with extraterrestrials, but I've done
Mm-hmm.
mediumship, and I know that it's very difficult. And anyone who says, "Well, it's easy," I
Mm-hmm.
don't believe is accurate. I'll be that dogmatic, because it's not easy. It requires real powers of concentration, in my opinion, to really be an accurate medium. And most people, they don't realize that. So, some of what they say is true, some of it isn't true, some of it's their imagination, some of it's genuine. But in the case of Dr. King, before he ever started, and why he was chosen to do what he did, was to practice advanced yoga forms, which isn't the sort of yoga we hear about now, keep fit, keep slim, etc. It's yoga, the philosophy and the advanced practice of yoga. He did that for 10 years for 8 hours a day. And so he honed his skills as well as doing a job. He honed his abilities so he could get extremely accurate um, messages, communications, transmissions, we call them, and they were put down on tape, and they can be tested. And some of them have proved true in the last 2 years.
Isn't it true though? I mean, I found that with what I'm doing is that you get your skeptics,
Yeah.
and they don't want to bend. No matter how much evidence you have
Oh,
to
yeah.
show them, or if they experience something. I've had people on my team that are skeptics that experience something, and they're still not going to believe.
Absolutely. And some people, if a UFO landed right in front of them, they'd say, "Oh, well, that was a hallucination." I mean, you could always come up with something.
Hmm.
Um, you've got to, and I quite agree with you. And I actually think the very best test is your own experience. I mean,
Right.
it may not be. Not everyone's going to have a UFO encounter, of course not.
Hmm.
You don't need to, but you can test from your own experience people who do. And with psychic things, which is something I've done a lot with, you can test your own experiences. So with channeling, I mean, somebody might disbelieve you. It doesn't really matter. Just to give an example, I got a message some years ago, which actually I published, which was um, turned out to be a 16th century author who died. He, still alive, but he's on another realm. Or two of them, actually. There were two of them. I hadn't even heard of either of them, and I got their names, and they did exist, and they still do exist on another realm. But the interesting thing was when I was getting the message, because when I do it, I concentrate very, very hard on the words and not the meaning of the words. That's important, because if you get into the meaning of the words, you start adding your own without even meaning to.
Mm-hmm.
You can start to put your own feelings, impressions, thoughts, and you can influence it. I don't do that. I just try to get almost like the letters of the words, and they come very quickly. You get them down, and only after that you look and see. It might take 3 minutes. You look and see. On this particular case, it was a poem. It rhymed. It had a meter, which was, I found out later, iambic tetrameters, as they're called. But I think it's da 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 in a line, and that's a 16th century thing. And some of the words were not 16th, 17th, I should have said, 17th century, the Shakespeare sort of times.
Sure.
It wasn't Shakespeare, and they were words that existed at the time. So I didn't know any of that, and I know I didn't know any of that, and I know I couldn't sit down and make a poem rhyme of that length in 3 minutes. And so it was absolutely proven to me. That's what I mean by your own experience. Now, somebody else can say, oh, well, I don't believe a word of it. You made that up. It's a good story. How do I know? Fair enough. They can do that. But I know what happened. And you can do that with healing. You can do that with UFO investigation. You can judge by your intelligence, but also your own experience.
Now, there had to be a reason why you decided to pursue, the whole disclosure thing. Did you have any alien contact or anything like that?
I had sightings. I had a major sighting when I was at university in the north of England, which they used to call cigar-shaped in those days, and it's like a cylindrical. But you find, one of the interesting things actually is that you find a lot in old documents. The Bible's just a UFO compendium. It's jam-packed full of UFOs, the Bible, but also the Hindu scripts, wonderful cases. So this particular shape is one that's been seen. And then I had that experience, hundreds saw it. But it was mainly that my interest was spiritual. I was looking for the meaning of life. I found it through Dr. King, and it just so happened he said that his source was extraterrestrial. So I got interested through that angle. And then I found through this particular case that the governments, people, even where I was, it was a place called Hull in the north of England, the university professors, everybody started lying about it. They came out, they felt the need, this is the 70s, they had to come out and say, well, this is a barium cloud. They found out there's no such thing as a barium cloud, and if there was, it wouldn't look like this. And so it all started to unravel, and I thought, what's going on here? And I looked into it, and in 1980, I brought some CIA papers over to Britain that had come, I think the Washington Post sued for them. I got hold of them. And what was interesting about that was not just that there was UFO activity, and this is a sighting over Tehran, it was in 1976, but also it demonstrated that these UFOs that were described in this CIA document, all of which I published in my books, this object was peaceful because it details as how some American jets tried to chase it. How futile is that? It's ridiculous. And not only chase it, they tried to fire a missile at it. Now, this isn't science fiction. This is a CIA document. I want to stress that, coming from the military in America, who had a base in Tehran at the time. It's before the changes in Iran. The political changes, 76. And when it tried to fire this missile at this object it was chasing, its weapons control panel went dead. It couldn't do it. As soon as it got out of range, its weapons control panel was activated again, which showed me two things. One, they could read the minds of the people in the jet. They knew what they were trying to do. They demonstrated their power. They didn't harm it. They just prevented it from harming them.
Mhm.
And then as soon as they were out of range, they activated its weapons control panel again. Now, that was an early experience I had. And then you see things like that. Many other cases come to light. And the recent stuff that's come out for the Pentagon, and I'll say well done, the Pentagon, for bringing something out. But
Mhm.
they show that the phenomenal powers of what they now call UAPs. They've renamed them for, I would say, political reasons, but
Mhm.
there you are. So they're peaceful. They are friendly. That's the thing they haven't admitted yet.
Well, I just find it interesting because, like you say, it's suddenly, they're suddenly starting to release it little by little by little. Do you think there's ever going to be a full disclosure, or you think it's just going to be bits and pieces like we've been getting?
It's very interesting because in a journal which was published, by Dr. King, so it's way before my time, called Cosmic Voice, and
Mhm.
I'll just hold that up. There's the issue
Okay.
of Cosmic Voice. That's about a Russian atomic accident, but in that one, a Russian atomic accident actually, which happened, it's the Kishtim disaster. Dr. King revealed the details of that 18 years before it was known in the world through the media at all, and he got it from an intelligence, shocking as this may sound, on Mars. We can come back to that if you like. There was
Yeah.
another journal at the time. The next issue said this, all a lot of which has come out. So will they ever reveal it? I believe they will. But one of the warnings in that journal, the first one I showed you, which was published in 1958, is that when they start to release these things, as they will, it was stated, and they are now, many, many decades later, they will also try to make out they're hostile. And that is happening.
Yes,
You've
they
even
will.
got whistleblowers and former people from the Ministry of Defense here and from the Pentagon there who are quite good. They're coming up with stuff at last, but they're also putting out the idea that they could be hostile. And that's ludicrous. And I mean, if they were, I think there's a statement in here. It should be obvious that we are friendly. If we weren't, you would not exist.
Mhm. Mhm. I got a couple questions in the chat room. This person says they live in Northern California. They've been seeing multi-level circular type white clouds that appear within a blue sky background. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't know much about that. I mean, it sounds like they're clouds. I know there are clouds that do look a bit
Mhm.
like UFOs.
Mhm.
So, one has to be careful. I'm not going to sort of come out here and say everything that everyone sees is a
Right.
extraterrestrial spacecraft, because it isn't.
Right.
But I think it could be an interesting thing. What you're looking for, I would suggest, is like a flight pattern that couldn't be a meteorite, couldn't be a terrestrial satellite, of which there are many.
Mhm.
Couldn't be any aircraft that we have. And you do get that. You do get that through the phenomenal speeds, the maneuverability of these craft to change
Mhm.
direction, at split second, to move sometimes through different um, modes, for example, through water, through air, beyond the stratosphere, to break the sound barrier. They've listed some of the thing without a sonic boom. They've listed some of the capabilities of these craft. So there are
Mhm.
some things I'd say probably aren't UAPs. There are some that might be, doesn't mean they are, but there are some which definitely are. Even if it's a small percentage, you only need one, and you've proved
Mhm.
the whole thing.
Mhm. The other question is, are you familiar with the work of Dr. Michael Salla?
Michael Salla, um, is he on Ancient Aliens? I have to try and think. Certainly the name is familiar. Michael Salla, yes.
He's an extrapolitic expert and is one of the leading ufologists in the USA. Okay, so it's
Right.
probably
The name, yeah, I'm familiar with that name,
yeah, it's
Michael. So
probably
I
him.
haven't met him, but yeah.
Let me ask you this: you mentioned Mars.
Yeah.
This gentleman getting information from Mars. It's
Mm.
always been thought. I'm not saying how old I am, but this is amazing to me. It's always been thought that there was life on Mars. So
Yeah.
how does Mars, relate into all this?
Well, one of the things Dr. King said right from the beginning, and I think this is key. I mean, there's
Mhm,
two things that are key about Dr. King's claims, and I invite people to investigate them. And form your own conclusions. I mean, as I
mhm,
said earlier, don't take my word for it. But there were two key things he said right from the beginning in 1955. The first is that his contacts are nearly all from this solar system. And that marks him out from most other claimants, because most other claimants have said, oh, well, you can't have life on Mars, Venus, Jupiter. So they go out to the Pleiades or Sirius or Alpha Centauri,
mhm,
somewhere, where it can't be disproved, frankly. But obviously, I would say the intelligences who have the greatest interest in us are from this solar system. But the connection, the second key point is that he always said there is multidimensional existence in the universe. Now, we take that now as a serious scientific possibility. They didn't then. They didn't really 20 years ago, never mind in the 50s. He said that we live in a many energy levels, not only on this earth. So when I mentioned these two poets, one was called Davenant, the other was called Fuchs Greville. I
mhm,
hadn't heard of either of them, but they did exist. Um, they live on another realm on this earth. It's not visible to you unless you happen to be quite a highly trained clairvoyant, or you're capable of astral projection under
mhm.
control, and that's also quite rare. Out of body experiences happen to millions of people around the world, just haphazardly, but being able to do it at will is quite a difficult thing to do. Very difficult, I would say. But unless you can do that, you won't see them, because they are vibrating at a different energy frequency. Likewise on Mars, likewise on Venus, only they're more evolved than we are. So we believe that Jesus came from another world, Buddha came from another world, Krishna came from another world, Moses came from another world. Number of now I agree, this is contentious, but
Mhm.
it was always the stated beliefs of Dr. King.
Well, I was just thinking as you were saying that about Jesus and the angels and Buddha and all them. When you think about it, and I'm going back to the chariots of the gods theories and all that.
Oh yeah.
They've always got a halo around their head,
Yeah.
which could be
Yeah.
a space helmet.
All right.
I'm open to
Yeah.
that. It's all
Yeah.
good. You have to.
Yeah.
I think the main thing with investigating anything like this, you have to have an open mind. And if you go in with a closed
Quite
mind,
agree.
it's not going to happen.
Well, it's very good to hear, Charlotte, because I think that is what we all need, especially now. And I mean, this is one of my favorite subjects, I have to admit. But when you go back, I mean, the Star of Bethlehem wasn't a star. I mean, if you believe in it, I know some nowadays a lot of people and even including priests and so forth come out and say, well, actually, it wasn't really a star. They're changing the story.
Hmm.
It was some astronomical phenomenon or astrological phenomenon or whatever. But actually, if you take the story, which is that three wise men, in other words, not deluded men, they followed an object which hovered over a stable. That was definitely a UFO, UAP, IFO, call it whatever you like. That was a spacecraft. It wasn't a star. A star can't do that. We know that. And that story, that's an obvious example. I think even more interesting to me in some ways is the experience on Mount Sinai that Moses had,
Hmm. Hmm.
when the Lord, as he was called there, and I wouldn't dispute that, um, came down to deliver the Ten Commandments. He came in a cloud. Comes back to our first questioner, actually. So I can't dismiss that first
Right.
question, by the way, and say it definitely isn't a UFO. But we certainly know that a Lord doesn't travel in a cloud. We know what clouds are now,
Hmm.
and that was the individual who delivered the Ten Commandments, which, whatever your beliefs,
Hmm.
you'd have to admit, changed world culture for thousands of years. And then, if you go back, I think the most far more interesting, actually, even than those, you find in the Ramayana. I think it's the oldest text on earth, I believe. Certainly, it's certainly one of them. Many thousands, but actually no one really knows how old it is, because it was passed down orally before it was ever written down.
Hmm.
um, there's a beautiful description of a Vimana meaning flying celestial vehicle. This is called the Pushpaka Vimana, for those familiar with it, seems to have been a real, like a satellite, in which many people were traveling from Sri Lanka, as we now call it, up to the Himalayas. So this is not new at all, and I believe there's a craft, similarly, a satellite in orbit right now, as I'm speaking to you right now, in orbit of this Earth. And its purpose is not to be sighted. There are many that are. Its purpose is to send down spiritual energy to. You could be a complete atheist
Mm-hmm.
and not believe in anything spiritual and still be helped by a craft like this, because you could still be radiating spiritual energy. You wouldn't call it that, but you might be a devoted nurse. You might be someone who's helps the poor. You might be doing things which are highly spiritual, and your energies would be enhanced by this satellite.
What do you think the aliens' purpose here is?
Well, I think their prime interest is the Mother Earth. I think it's the planet more than the people on the planet. They have a great compassion for the people on the planet. They won't force us to change. They won't interfere with us. They certainly don't want to take over the world. They certainly don't mean us any harm. That isn't to say there aren't evil races out in the
Mm-hmm.
universe, but we are protected because the intelligences we believe in this solar system are highly benign.
Mm-hmm.
I've mentioned some of those who came from other worlds. I could mention others: Confucius, Lao Tse, Patanjali,
Mm-hmm.
great, wonderful intelligences who protect us, luckily. Otherwise, we wouldn't stand a chance because we're way, way behind them. They can get here. We can't get there,
Right.
But I think their purpose, to answer your question, is to help the planet, the Mother Earth, which is really being abused by us, and also to try and virtually help us to save ourselves, really, from what is due down the line on this Earth. And they're doing that by radiating, as I mentioned, spiritual energy, by giving these great teachings. They brought teachings to Earth before by being born as avatars or born through the womb of Earth women, such as Jesus, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But now they delivered these wonderful teachings, and check them out. Check out one. I'll just mention one: 12 Blessings. There's a website, 12 Blessings, 12blessings.org, and there you'll find these new age teachings delivered by Jesus. They go way beyond the Sermon on the Mount. They go into the cosmos,
Mm-hmm.
and they are also a practice which people can do, and people do, and they tune in. And you don't have to be an Aetherius Society member or anything like that. You could have whatever beliefs you have, but you can join in with this and send positive energy out to the world.
Now, when you did your research, how were you able to obtain the documents that you obtained?
I mean, I don't have sort of inside sources within governments, although I was in touch with a man called Nick Pope, who's now a UFO man. He
Mm-hmm.
makes his livings, but I was in touch with him the day he moved into, I think that's probably improved a bit, moved into the Ministry of Defense here. And on his first day in the UFO department, he got a phone call from me, actually. And I said to him, do you believe in UFOs? He said, not particularly. I said, well, you will. And now it's his whole career. But I don't agree with him on one point. He does put out also the idea that they could be hostile, but he
Mm-hmm.
has revealed some things. So I just contacted various people. For example, I was in touch with TASS, the Soviet agency, just as a person, as an individual. And so I got some documents sent to me about a UFO which landed in 1989 in a place called Voronezh. I think it's 600 miles from Moscow, roughly. And this craft landed in a park in front of a crowd of people.
Mm-hmm.
It left in, and then what happened was this crowd of people saw an intelligence get out of the object. I'm cutting the whole thing quite briefly.
Sure.
A child started to cry in sort of fear and worry, and this intelligence pointed what looked like a gun at the child. The child disappeared. And then walked back into the craft. The child reappeared. The craft left, leaving indentations in the ground. This is all according to TASS. Again, it's Soviet agency TASS. And the story was reported. It was reported during the Gorbachev era, if anyone remembers President Gorbachev, who was trying to tell the truth. He was trying to be open. He got mercilessly ridiculed in the pathetic media of the West, not yourself, but some of the media of the West.
Hmm.
And I sort of retrieved the story, put it out properly. And I think it's an interesting one too, because it shows again they weren't hostile. They
Hmm.
even helped this child who was upset. They didn't harm anybody. They demonstrated their powers of invisibility and then, their powers over matter. Because let's face it, only 4% of the universe is visible to us.
Right.
96% is dark matter, dark energy. And I heard the other day that if you looked upon the light spectrum, or the electromagnetic spectrum, I should say, as being 2,500 miles long, the amount of it that would be visible is 2 inches.
Hmm.
So we don't know a fraction of what exists in the universe, and they, I believe, have a control over matter. And this has been reported, and it's been seen by the Navy in America, and it's in the Pentagon. They can disappear, they can reappear. They have powers over matter that we don't have. The kind of powers you'd associate with the yogis in the Himalayas, or some alchemist or something, uh, which have existed on Earth to some degree, not to the same degree, but have always been in mysticism, rather than in, you know, materialistic science.
Now, you had found some CIA paperwork.
Yeah.
And what was that like? I mean, was there a lot of like? I mean, you see this stuff in the movies where people find this stuff and there's a lot of blacked out information on it and stuff. Is that
Yeah.
what it was like, or
Well,
what did
this
it look like when you got it?
Yeah, some of it is redacted. I mean, this was as a courtesy of Washington Post. I just happened to be in touch with them, and I happened to bring it to Britain. Oh, I must tell you, by the way, Charlotte,
Hmm.
because this just sorry to get on to another topic, but a poll came out over here. This is some British news for your American viewers there, but apparently, even I find this quite extraordinary. They did a poll just before the anniversary of Roswell, the 75th anniversary of Roswell over there, and they found out that 1 in 3 Britons, and this is on June the 30th of this year,
Hmm.
1 in 3 Britons have seen a UFO.
Wow.
This is not believe in UFOs; they've seen a UFO, because people are coming out and saying it. They didn't think they could say it.
Hmm.
I mean, I used to give lectures, and a man would stand up and tell us a UFO sighting, and his wife would be really annoyed because he'd never told her. People
Right.
were too embarrassed to tell their next of kin, their own family, never mind people at work. But sorry to divert there.
That's
So
okay.
the actual Washington Post, the CIA documents, the best one was the one I mentioned over Tehran, but there were hundreds of them, and it's a long time ago, and really they've been sort of. One thing I would say though is that I wrote a book with Dr. King, called
Hmm.
Contacts with the Gods from Space. And it was published 25 years ago. It's the last book published in his lifetime. He passed on in 1997. This was published in 1996. It was really his book, but he asked me to co-author it with him. And in it, if I could read you just a couple of passages from that,
Absolutely.
they're short, but they've all been proved or confirmed, I would say, last year, in the Pentagon release on June the 25th of last year.
Okay.
And this is
Absolutely.
this is what we wrote. I'm quoting directly from Contacts with the Gods from Space, and it was in reference to extraterrestrial spacecraft and their technological capabilities. And I quote: "They are protected by a force field which is intensified in direct relation to the velocity of the craft. The force field protects the vessel and the occupants from atmospheric friction, counteracting the otherwise disastrous effects which could be caused by severe magnetic fluctuations which are contacted while passing through the terrestrial, ionospheric, and heavy side layers at the extremely high velocity of which these craft are capable. The system of control of the natural fields of magnetic energy enables the operators to use the energy potential of existing, I'm sorry it's a bit wordy here, of
Okay.
existing gravitational fields, which may be used as a secondary propulsion unit to enable easy landings onto and ascents from any planetary mass. They know that gravity is a dual-poled magnetic force, and they are able to reverse these poles at will. Some of these crafts have been seen to perform a reciprocal pattern of flight at fantastic speeds. Such aerobatics would only be possible if the force of gravity were known and controlled. Some vessels can be dematerialized at will by their operators, and the vibratory octave of their existence so changed as to become invisible to our eyesight. Now, that's an extract. It's a little wordy. These are the words of Dr. King, and they're based on transmissions that he'd received back in the 1950s. Now, last year, it came out, and I'll just list some of the things that they admitted to
Sure.
about what they call UFPs. The ability to maneuver abruptly, the ability to move at considerable speed without discernible means of propulsion, sudden and instantaneous acceleration, hypersonic velocities without signatures, signatures being something that they can detect
Mhm.
materially, low observability, positive lift apparently resisting the natural effects of Earth's gravity, control over atmospheric friction, as for example when a UFO exceeds the speed of sound without a sonic boom. Those things were admitted last year. They are all contained in that passage, with explanations actually that I read out to you that was published 25 years earlier than the Pentagon report. There's a silence group, and some people call it deep state. Actually, I know Donald Trump referred to deep state.
Mhm.
And actually, yesterday, our prime minister, as you may or may not have heard, is just being sort of
Right.
he's being booted out as we speak. He's called Boris Johnson,
Right.
but he referred yesterday to a deep state. Bill Clinton came out only last month. I think it was last month. Yeah, it was, and said that he tried to get to the truth of Roswell, and nobody would tell him, basically. And now he says this. So many years earlier, Winston Churchill tried to find out what flying saucers, as they call them, are, and they
Mhm.
didn't tell him the truth. And that's within his own government. That was a Lord High Admiral or somebody like that. So there is a deep state, there is a silence group, there are powers, and even, presidents, prime ministers aren't being given the full truth. Never mind us.
Right. Right. I also heard, and this is kind of silly off topic, I also heard that Prince Philip was a believer.
Oh, yeah. Well, Prince Philip definitely was a believer, and actually, his what we have, we have some strange positions in the royal family of Britain, and one of them is called an equerry, and an equerry you might call a personal aide,
Mm-hmm.
and his personal aide was a man called Sir Peter Horsley, and he was given the job by Prince Philip, particularly in the 1950s, of reporting on UFOs back to Prince Philip. And he had an encounter in 1954 with someone he believed was an alien intelligence. That was called Mr. Janus. And he actually, or he was given the name Mr. Janus,
Mm-hmm.
which is the name of a Roman god. He told me the full story of that. I got an absolute exclusive on that from him. I put it in my book, UFOs and the Extraterrestrial Message. He told me that when he had this meeting with someone he believed was from another planet, that it changed his entire life. Now we're
Mm-hmm.
talking 1954. This intelligence, Mr. Janus, told him about the capability of speeds faster than light, of telepathic ability. He said the alien intelligence demonstrated telepathy to him and his powers of telepathy, changed his worldview and his spiritual view forever, combining Eastern and Western views, talked about the capabilities of the capacity of extraterrestrials, but he, Sir Peter Horsley, never passed this information back to Prince Philip, which I think is a derogation of duty. Really,
Absolutely.
he was sort of hounded out. He was silenced. He admitted it after he retired and was living in the Bahamas. He's passed on now, and gave me an absolute exclusive, which
Mhm.
goes on the front page of our biggest newspaper in Britain called The Sun. And yeah, so yes, you're right. Prince Philip had a tremendous interest in. They didn't talk about it until after his recent demise.
Do you believe in alien hybrids?
Well, I think it's I do think it's possible. Yes, depending what one means by that.
Hmm.
I think the sort of intelligences I've been talking about, the spiritual intelligences, great
Right.
beings, are not hybrids, but I think they certainly have the capability, if they chose to develop those, and certainly to use of robots and unmanned craft. I don't think all the craft that are seen are necessarily manned.
Absolutely. Because I know, yeah, there's a question in the chat room about Simon Parks.
Yes, but what is the question?
Oh, he
Do I
was just
know?
wondering if you knew about him.
I've heard the name. Against another name. I mean, I don't claim to know every case there is. So
Right, right, right.
but again, I've come across that. I'd have to be reminded of the case in point there. Yeah.
When you look at the files of, say, the Pentagon or the CIA and even the stuff over in the UK,
Yeah.
what's the conclusion you can get from the file? From what you have seen.
I think that, one of the excuses that they used to come up with, and I do believe the Pentagon some years ago admitted they lied about this.
Hmm.
They used to say, well, what they are, if you've seen these objects, is very advanced technology that we've been testing. They're actually from this Earth. That sort
Right.
of whole angle that came out. I think that is absolutely false, by which I mean, it doesn't mean there isn't any of that. But some of the craft cannot be explained that way. And what we have found out this year, actually, is that Russia has an identical program, and so does China. And that the head of their agency in Russia, said he's in touch with NASA. NASA has now, as of last month, started their own, as well as the Pentagon. They've got their own investigative body. The
Hmm.
head of NASA, Bill Nelson, definitely believes in extraterrestrials, definitely believes we might be contacted. The head of the Russian one, he hopes we will be contacted. He's very sort of hopeful about it in his statements. And China, too, have got evidence. They
Hmm.
don't know the full answers. This is where I think we have to come back to the spiritual factor. I think until we do that, we won't really get the answers. I think they're giving even these bodies enough information to keep them pursuing it, to make them become more honest, more open, but they're leaving questions. And I think people then have to turn to a genuine contact such as Dr. George King. I'm not saying he's the only one, but I think he's, in my opinion, the most significant one I know of, certainly. Um, they have to look at this. They may not like the idea of mediumship or channeling, but it
Hmm.
doesn't really matter whether you like the idea or not. It's whether it's true. That's the only thing that matters. And it really makes perfect sense. They communicate telepathically. And that's what mediumship is, actually. In essence, it's a form of telepathy.
When you talk about Dr. King, for the people that don't know him over the United States, can you kind of summarize?
Yeah, so I'd be delighted to. So first of all, you can see a picture of him. Get my finger in the right
Right over
direction.
your shoulder. I see it.
There we are.
Right there, right there, right there.
Yeah. He's an extraordinary person. I was very lucky to be not only, as it were, a disciple of his, but a very close friend. And he's a truly remarkable person, completely genuine. I think even his critics, if they've looked into him at all, even if they don't believe in him,
Hmm.
they have to hand it to him. He lived and practiced exactly what he preached. And there is a biography of him, which I was privileged to co-author, called The King Who Came to Earth. And you can find that, and it will tell you everything, well, a lot about him anyway. But he was one of those very rare people. I'm going to stick my neck out and say I don't even believe he came from this world, although he never claimed that publicly.
Hmm.
He was the most extraordinary person. He turned his mind, as I briefly mentioned, to the practice of yoga. And this would be after the Second World War. So we're talking 1945, 1946. Yoga just wasn't practiced, certainly in Britain, much at all. It wasn't taken at all seriously. But he had tried other avenues. He was looking for truth. He was looking not for faith, but direct experience of
Hmm.
that truth. and he decided to go down the yoga route. And he did this by practicing, if people have heard of things like this, Kundalini yoga, and other advanced forms, including Raja, Nani, and others. And he did it for 8 hours a day for 10 years. That alone marks him out, I think, from anyone I've heard of in the West. I remain to be corrected, but I don't. And so in doing so, he was in his 20s and early 30s. He, all the usual things he forgave. I mean, he went without. He had a job. He didn't have money in his own right, so he had to work, which he did mainly as a driver. He did a few jobs, but he was there to get to the bottom of things, and he did. He mastered yoga. He entered the state known as samadhi, and only then he was contacted. So his contact took place in the same year as Sir Peter Horsley met an alien that I mentioned, the equerry of Prince Philip, in 1954, in the same town, actually, of London. He met, and his contact was called Aetherius. It's interesting because this name Janus, and we didn't even know about him till 1997. It was hushed up and kept secret till after Dr. King's demise, which is very interesting, in 1997. This contact of Sir Peter Horsley, but Dr. King's contact in the same year, in the same town, was with an intelligence given the name Aetherius. Same kind of ending, Janus, Aetherius. And the master Aetherius, as we call him, delivered a set of teachings. So he was able to use him as a channel. And from 1955 in January, he started doing this in public in London. And he started to produce a journal called Cosmic Voice, and he set up the Aetherius Society to put these teachings out. But the main thing wasn't even the teachings. The main thing for him was direct cooperation with people from other worlds. And for the next 43 years, up to the day of his passing, and I was with him, I was in touch with him, I'd say, every day for the last 20 years of his life. I was either with him in America, in Santa Barbara, where he had a small bungalow, or in LA, or in London, or on the phone, one way or another. He lived it 101%. He was a genuine contact. Just to give a couple of examples, I was with him just hours before the Chernobyl disaster, and he got a communication warning him that he wasn't told it would be Chernobyl, but he was told, that a disaster was due. There needed to be UFO intervention. There needed to be a program of action, which he instigated. I think it was started, I think I'm right in saying, something like an hour and a half after Chernobyl actually happened. Hadn't even been told about Chernobyl. It didn't come out for a few days. 16 years later, Pravda admitted that UFO had indeed intervened over Chernobyl and reduced the impact fourfold. But that was 16 years after he published it. That's just one example. Another one I mentioned earlier was the Kishtim Russian disaster. He revealed the details of that in 1958 in this journal. And it wasn't released to the public in the world until 1976. So those are just a couple of sort of examples, but the main thing isn't that sort of evidence, it's the teachings that he received. I mean, my favorite's called The Nine Freedoms. I do a sort of podcast myself called The Spiritual Freedom Show. People will find it at aetherius.org or on my website. By the way, all this kind of latest UFO stuff is on my website right now. If people want to look it up, it's richardlawrence.co.uk. And you'll find it there. But the main thing that he did, I think, was to live his beliefs, and he set up a whole series of actions that we can do in direct cooperation. I mentioned the satellite that's in orbit now. We have the dates for the next 1,000 years. We're still doing it. We're very active. I mean, for example, on Saturday, we're going to a place in the UK called Holston Down, which is in North Devon, and I imagine about 100 of us will be down there sending energy out to the world. But it also happens very near you. I should mention Mount Baldy in California is a place of constant pilgrimage by people in the society and some people not in the society who go there for spiritual reasons. So we're very active, and he was extremely active. He led from the front. He was a very humble man. He was a very shy man, actually, might be very confident. It was a strange mix of complete confidence and yet shy at the same time. He didn't seek publicity. He didn't like the limelight at all, really. But he obviously had to do some media work, and he did a lot of speaking and a lot of writing. He had a tremendous down-to-earth sense of humor. He was
Mm-hmm.
very grounded, but he was a master of yoga, and he had this knowledge. He knew it wasn't sort of guesswork. He had 100% knowledge that it was true. Now it's up to people to decide whether or not they believe it, but he
Mm-hmm.
was the real thing. I'm lucky. I saw it at first-hand experience,
Right.
and I witnessed it.
Well, Mount Baldy brings me to my next question.
Oh,
Now, I used to live near Mount Shasta,
oh wow! I'd love to go
and
there.
you know the rumors about Mount Shasta, and and the reptilians living underneath and all that. Do you think the aliens are here already?
I think they're here already. Yes, I do, and I think, but it's not just the aliens. We should run away from the idea or avoid the fact there are great masters, um, from this earth.
Mm-hmm.
And if you talk about Mount Shasta, I mean, one of my heroes is a master by the name of Count Saint Germain, who is very connected with Mount Shasta and very connected with Europe too here, but is an ascended master. And it's quite unusual because you tend to think of us. By the way, may I quickly say this? Master
Sure.
doesn't mean male. Can I quickly say
Yeah.
master is male, female, and I believe that the intelligences on higher planets are both. I don't think they're limited to one gender. I think they can be trisexual. They're above that. They incorporate many aspects in their one intelligence. So if you get an intelligence, for example, like Sri Krishna, it was necessary on this earth because of how backward we've been for so long
Mm-hmm.
in our treatment of women. Terrible way it's been. He had to come in a male body, but he wasn't a male intelligence. He was trisexual intelligence, for example. He's one of the greatest ones who's ever come. So there are ascended masters, male and female, from this earth, and I do think that's a big factor, and I understand with Mount Shasta in particular, actually, but also the Himalayas and certain other
Right.
places, I believe Mount Fuji, where you have them, and you have Great White Brotherhood. Sometimes, again, it's misleading because they aren't mainly white, actually, and they certainly aren't all male. These are old-fashioned words. They don't mean anything wrong, but they're just the wrong words. But um, in this organization, let's call it the spiritual hierarchy, if you like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
they often reside within mountains. I think Mount Shasta is one. I think Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa is another. Castle Peak, also in America, is another.
Right.
And we have one here in Scotland called Ben McDewey in the Cairngorm range, if anyone knows that at all. But they're around the world, certainly in South America. And these are very great intelligences who are not extraterrestrial. They've
Mm-hmm.
come from this earth. They've mastered the life cycle on Earth. They don't need to die anymore. They have what you might call eternal youth. They can remain in one body for thousands of years if they choose to, and they're seen. Count Saint Germain was seen in another of my favorite subjects for hundreds of years in the same body in France. One woman saw him at the same age when she was a sort of young lady, and then at court, and then later at court when she was in her 80s, looking exactly the same.
Mm-hmm. So that topic in particular fascinates me. To
And
think
me.
that they're here, and like you say, they're interdimensional, so you're not going to see them anyway unless they want to be seen.
Absolutely, and they have a complete control over matter, so they can manifest on whatever level they want to manifest on at any given moment. And it
Mm-hmm.
might be physical, it might be a higher level. They don't even have what we might think of as an aura,
Mm-hmm.
which you and I have, and a clairvoyant can see and can even
Mm-hmm.
perhaps do a reading. I mean, I used to do readings. I've done hundreds of them, and so one good thing about that is you can prove to yourself that you are psychic. Everyone can be psychic. It's
Right.
not just a gift for a few or anything like this. It's a question of where you want to put your energy. May not be your priority, but you can become a healer. You can certainly send out great. And people say, well, look, our healing works on an individual. Does it work on the world? Yes. It might be called prayer. Might be
Mhm.
called mantra. Definitely, it's sending energy out to the world is the most important thing that any of us can do. I think I've gone off your question. I'm sorry,
Oh,
Charlotte.
okay, don't worry about it. Because my
Mhm.
next question had to do with mediums and psychics. I mean,
Yeah.
because you were talking about Dr. Kelly, and do you think that some mediums are in contact with aliens without even realizing it?
Yes, and I think some great, not just mediums, but some great artists, composers,
Mhm, mhm,
scientists
mhm,
have been unconsciously channeling
mhm,
higher intelligences. The planet we understand in this solar system most connected to music, for example, is Jupiter.
mhm,
And I would believe I actually happen I on my I wake up on radio to classical music, and it was Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto when I woke up this morning, and I was just thinking to myself that that comes from somewhere. That has a feeling of kundalini about it, to me anyway.
mhm,
And also, I'm sure there's a Jupiterian influence behind some of the great classical composers.
mhm.
Grieg, well, one could, list them all off, or many of them, but they wouldn't have known that. They'd be unconscious channelers. And so
Right.
it's likewise writers. But then you can develop it, as Dr. King did, into a conscious thing. I also think it's quite dangerous. I think you've got to have great powers of concentration. I just don't think the average person could discriminate enough between their imagination and what they're really getting. As
Mhm,
far as I'm concerned, as I said earlier, it's extremely difficult thing to do. Case of Dr. King, he developed samadhi, and if those have heard of it, it's the deepest state of meditation. It's not a passive state. It's not a state of relaxation. It's almost the opposite. It's total, complete, single-minded concentration down to one point. And he didn't even focus on the words of the message. He focused simply on the beam
mhm,
of energy as a generated beam of thought, which might be looked to him like a light, which he could receive and harness and focus on his own uh, larynx, if you like, to enable him to just become a channel. He went beyond even telepathy as we know it,
mhm,
and went to the root source, the energy source. His brain then translated it into words. After he'd received a transmission, he didn't know what had been said because he'd gone above the conscious mind, even the memory. He had complete control over it, but he had to switch it on, and it was great effort, and switch it off afterwards. And only then, when he heard the tape back, did he actually know what had been said. Now that's a state of mediumship. As I say, I've done mediumship myself. I have
mhm.
never heard anyone else describe, any medium describe, in the way that he did it, and that's why he was so accurate over the 43 years.
See, that's why I wonder about things like these, like you say, the writers and the scientists that come up with this stuff, like stealth technology, or even the people like Ray Bradbury, Gene Roddenberry.
Yeah,
These different people that write this
certainly,
futuristic stuff that come true. Where does it
certainly.
come from?
Certainly, they could be inspired, and sometimes you don't know. I mean,
Hmm.
sometimes all of us, we could be driving in a car. A little thought comes into our head: "Don't turn left,"
Hmm.
and so you don't. You decide to follow it. It's a silly thing, this, but you
Hmm.
don't turn left, and then you find out down there was an accident, and so on. This, I mean, I used to do radio phone-ins over here and get lots of cases like this. Now they don't. They say to me, "What was that thought? Don't turn left." One man, I'll give you. I remember he phoned up a phone-in show I did in Britain, and he was a pilot, and he was about to He was a parachutist. He was about to jump, and he heard a voice saying to him, "Don't jump." And he was ordered, and he checked the parachute, checked it, and it had been packed wrongly, and he would have died. This is just anecdotal, just a man who phoned me up. Now he said, "Where did that come? Who was that? What was that?" And sometimes you don't know. It could be your guide. It could be a guardian angel. It could be your own intuition.
Hmm.
Sometimes you just don't know where it comes from. Okay, this is more basic than your scientists that you were talking about
Hmm.
there, but it's it saved his life, and in some ways it doesn't really matter where exactly it comes from as long as it's true. And this is
Hmm.
where you have to discriminate, and that's what Dr. King used to say. He said, look, what I got has come from somewhere. Either I've made it up, it's come from my brain,
Hmm.
or as I'm claiming, it comes from extraterrestrials. If it's extraterrestrials, it's wonderful. If it isn't, I must be somebody fantastic to come up with this, and I'm not claiming that. So people can form their judged by the merit of the information received. That's what I would say.
Now, last question today. How this hour's gone by fast. This is
It's
fabulous.
been a
Thank you so
pleasure,
much.
Charlotte.
My last question is that, as far as disclosure goes, do you see the governments? I'm saying governments altogether because it's probably going to be a big governments thing. Do you see them releasing the information to us slowly, like they're doing now, or is there going to be one big information drop?
Well, it's my understanding that there is great conflict, for example, within the Pentagon. For all I know, the same could be true in Russia and China. Britain is
Hmm.
pathetic. They are, I won't even say how pathetic they are on this topic, and dishonest. France is better on this, actually. And for a British person to say that is unusual, I can assure you.
Hmm.
But France is, in Europe, one of the better ones. But I understand there's a great conflict, and there's a kind of a battle going on between the sort of deep state factions who don't want it out and
Hmm.
have interests in, complicated interests in defense. Why is it in the Pentagon? Why is it in the British Ministry of Defense? It's not a defense issue. They're not a threat to us. That's obvious, should be obvious. And I think they know that, but they wrap it up. They'll also try and use it to try and get more. I'm not avoiding your question here, but to
No,
try and
no,
get
no,
more
no. Yeah.
money put into arms. So therefore, they want to build up this idea we need to defend ourselves. It helps the arms industry. You've
Hmm.
got all these interests going on, sadly. So I think it will be slow, but in the end, they'll have no choice. I mean, if I could sum it up in an editorial Dr. King wrote in 1958. He said this, and he had a campaign in 1958 on the street
Hmm.
for a release of information. And you can imagine the reception he got in conservative Britain in
Wow.
1958. But he said, "We will not stop now. We're all prepared for a long campaign if necessary. We all know that eventually we shall win through and succeed in breaking this unfair silence curtain fabricated by the government. For just as surely as tomorrow's sun will rise, the governments of Britain and every other country must eventually tell you, the taxpayer, the truth." Dr. George King.
Absolutely. One more quick thought too on that. Do you think some of it has to do with fear, where they don't want to make the public fearful?
I think that's their excuse,
Mhm.
but I think they could easily get round that. As I mentioned to you earlier, I can give you the exact words, and this was said by a Martian, and he said it. Um, I'm looking in the wrong quote, but he definitely said um, that it should be obvious that we are friendly. If we weren't, you would not exist. So I think the truth must come out. Have I answered your question there, Charlotte? I'm not
Absolutely.
sure that I have,
Absolutely.
but
Absolutely.
I think they will tell the truth. I think and the more they do, here's a positive. The more they do, it'll be good for the karma of the world, if I can bring
Hmm.
karma into it.
Hmm.
And every step that we take to them, they can take too towards us. Every time the governments lie, it sets the whole world back. Every time they're honest, it helps the intelligences from other worlds to come closer to us and to reveal more. And they can't stop it coming. Every now and then they try. Even UFO groups sometimes say UFOs don't exist, but they can't stop them coming. They're here to stay. They'll go on giving evidence, and eventually there will be a new age on the world, on this world, and eventually the day will come when they'll actually walk among us.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. This was a
Thank you.
fantastic hour. I appreciate you coming on. I really do.
Well, I appreciate you inviting me, Charlotte. Thank you for being open-minded and listening and hearing me out.
I would love to have you on again to pick your brain
I'd
some
love
more.
to. Love
That
to.
that would be great. How can
Thank you,
people
Charlotte.
find you?
They find me at richardlawrence.co.uk, and they'll find the Aetherius Society at Aetherius, Aetheris dot IUS, I beg your pardon, Aetheris
Mhm.
.org,
Fantastic. Again, thank you so much, and have a good rest of your evening.
And you have a good day in
Yes,
beautiful California. Love it. Love
yes.
California.
It's hot but beautiful.
Okay.
All right, sir. Thank you very much. Have a good one.
Thank you. God
Okay,
bless.
bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, I've learned so much. Thank you so much again, Richard. Wow. It's really fun to talk to somebody on the other side of the pond to get their view on stuff, because sometimes it's a little different from what's going on over here in the United States. And I think I got that view pretty good for people. Tomorrow we're shifting gears a little bit. Be back on at 6:30 p.m. Pacific with Michael Goddard. Michael Goddard has done investigating into his past lives, and he has 88 past lives. 88. I've never heard of anybody with that many past lives before. So that's going to be fairly interesting. So that'll be tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. Pacific. If you like the show, we'd like you to share it. If you liked it, share it with 5 people. If you hated the show, share it with 5 of your enemies. We are equal opportunity here at California Haunts Radio. Also, if you're watching from Facebook, please follow. If you're watching from Twitch, please follow. If you're watching from TikTok, please follow. And if you're on YouTube, if you look down in the bottom right-hand corner over there, you will see a little ghost with a magnifying glass and a Sherlock Holmes hat. That's our mascot. That's how you click the subscribe to the videos that we do. We go out Monday through Thursday, or actually Sunday through Friday. Sunday we read from a paranormal themed book, and then the rest of the week it's guess. And if you look at the topics, because I'm a journalist, I'm also a photojournalist, so I like to kind of change it up. So you'll see different topics over there. So I think there's something for that might interest just about everybody sitting over there at YouTube. Our website is californiahauntsradio.com. Our actual website for the paranormal group is californiahaunts.org. But I want to thank everybody for coming, and I really appreciate each and every one of you. Everybody in the Mideast that listens to us, everybody in the UK that listens to us, everybody everywhere that listens to this show. It's a little show that could, and sometimes YouTube doesn't show us enough love, but we're getting there. We're chugging along, and we're getting there, little by little. It's baby steps, but yeah, big changes the last year and a half. To see the show take off like it has, and I'm really excited. And it's due to guests like Richard. And we couldn't do it without guests like Richard. Anyway, also, we are a nonprofit group, and in other words, I own the group, I own the team, I own everything. Everything comes out of my pocket. So, equipment here, the computers, the lights, the cameras, any paranormal equipment that the team uses out in the field, I pay for it also. If something breaks, it comes out of my pocket. I'm also paying for the internet and all that other stuff. And I was just hoping that if you can find it in your heart to help me out a little bit, because I do want to keep this show coming, and I do want to keep guests like Richard coming on, and you can do that at paypal.me at California Haunts, or if you don't like PayPal, Venmo, and then just type in California Haunts. Anyway, thank you again, and thank Richard again, and I will see you guys, and hopefully some of you guys that were on today from the UK can join us tomorrow or watch the recording of tomorrow's show. I'll see you guys at 6:30. Let's see if I can get this up here. Okay, push my buttons. Here we go. Thank you. Have a good. And hang on one second. I'm going to give you Richard's information real quick. And there you go. Websites: richardlawrence.co.uk, Aetherius.org, and 12blessings.com. All right, and his books are here: The Magic of Healing, and we've got The Little Book of Karma. We've also got The King and The Little Book of Yin and Yang. And UFOs, extraterrestrial message. And of course, the book he was talking about, Contact with the Gods from Space. And those are available on Amazon. And thank you guys. I'll see you at 6:30 p.m. Pacific tomorrow. Here we go.